So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got a couple dozen clips on several different topics for what should be an interesting show tonight, I think. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with my commentary between the clips. And then after I show all the clips, hopefully I'll be able to get a little live discussion going from the live viewers. This week, I'll be using clips from the Sunday morning news shows on the regular Big Five outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, and I'll also use some quasi-news clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday and also from last night's Saturday Night Live on NBC. I'll be showing clips on NSA spying, on the upcoming Sochi Olympics, on immigration, and more topics than that, but first, I wanted to start with one of the sexiest topics of the week, the latest chapter in the Republican war on women narrative with these controversial comments from Mike Huckabee, who's a former and possibly future Republican candidate for president, which Bill Maher covered in his monologue on HBO's Real Time last Friday like this.
I don't know if you saw this week, but it does not seem to matter how hard Republicans try to rebrand themselves. They continue to talk about women's lady parts and how much they hate pleasure-seeking vaginas. Mike Huckabee, you're familiar? We've had him on the show. Mike Huckabee, nice guy. He says women take birth control because they can't control their libido. Yes, that is the big problem in America. Too many horny chicks. I've always said this.
Now, Bill Maher's characterization of what Governor Mike Huckabee said wasn't completely accurate there. And I'll show the actual Mike Huckabee comments in a moment, but I noticed that Seth Meyers, and let me put this up, on last night's Saturday Night Live Weekend Update was more accurate in paraphrasing Mike Huckabee's comments and even had a little jab at the Democrats in his punchline in this clip.
While addressing the Republican National Committee's winter meeting, Mike Huckabee said the Democrats are trying to convince women that they can't control their libido without the help of the government, though it's usually the government that has trouble controlling its libido.
Now, in that punchline, that was Elliot Spitzer, John Edwards, and Anthony Weiner pictured, and those are all Democrats. And also, the characterization of Mike Huckabee's comments by Seth Meyers there was pretty accurate, and you can see that when I'll show you. Here's a clip from David Gregory on Meet the Press. He played Mike Huckabee's comments and then asked Huckabee's possible rival for the Republican nomination in 2016, Senator Rand Paul, to react to what Mike Huckabee said, and I'll show you that clip here.
Within the Republican Party, former candidate Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, got in some hot water this week with comments he made. I'll play a portion of it as he talked about a war for women. Here's what he said.
The Democrats want to insult the women of America by making them believe that they are helpless without Uncle Sugar coming in and providing for them a prescription each month for birth control because they cannot control their libido or their reproductive system without the help of the government, then so be it. Let us take that discussion all across America because women are far more than the Democrats have played them to be.
Is this helpful?
Well, you know, I think we have a lot of debates in Washington that get dumbed down and are used for political purposes. This whole sort of war on women thing, I'm scratching my head because if there was a war on women, I think they won. You know, the women in my family are incredibly successful. I have a niece at Cornell Vet School, and 85% of the young people there are women. In law school, 60% are women. In med school, 55%. My younger sister's an OBGYN with 6 kids and doing great. You know, I don't see so much that women are downtrodden. I see women rising up and doing great things. And in fact, I worry about our young men sometimes because I think the women really are out competing the men in our world.
But my question about whether you think it's appropriate for the party, key figures in the party, to be talking about women, women's health, women's bodies, and the role of the federal government related to those things.
I try never to have discussions of anatomy unless I'm at a medical conference. But
Now, that was actually a pretty soft swipe at one of Rand Paul's possible Republican rivals for president in 2016, I think. And it also sounds a lot to me like that Rand Paul spent a significant amount of time thinking about how he wants to answer the whole war on women question if he does run in 2016. But speaking of the war on women, Rand Paul was not at all as soft when dealing with his possible Democratic rival in 2016, Hillary Clinton, when he responded to Meet the Press's David Gregory asking him about something Rand Paul's wife Kelly said in a recent Vogue magazine article. And I'll show you that clip here.
Hillary Clinton. And an interesting profile in Vogue magazine, including this analysis. While her husband jokes, meaning you, that his gut feeling is that Hillary Clinton will not run for president is a good thing, since all the polls show her trouncing any opponents, Kelly, the wife of Senator Rand Paul, practically cuts him off to say that Bill Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky should complicate his return to the White House, even as first spouse. I would say his behavior was predatory, offensive to women, she tells me. Are these issues something that you really think will be fair game and an appropriate part of a campaign should she be the nominee?
Well, you know, I mean, the Democrats, one of their big issues is they've concocted and says Republicans are committing a war on women. One of the workplace laws and rules that I think are good is that bosses shouldn't prey on young interns in their office. And I think really the media seems to have given President Clinton a pass on this. He took advantage of a girl that was 20 years old and an intern in his office. There is no excuse for that, and that is predatory behavior, and it should be something we shouldn't want to associate with people who would take advantage of a young girl in his office. This isn't having an affair. I mean, this isn't me saying, oh, he's had an affair, we shouldn't talk to him. Someone who takes advantage of a young girl in their office, I mean, really. And then they have the gall to stand up and say Republicans are having a war on women. So, yes, I think it's a factor. Now, it's not Hillary's fault. And,
but it should be an issue.
But it is a factor in judging Bill Clinton in history.
Right, but is it something that Hillary Clinton should be judged on if she were a candidate in 2016?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. This was with regard to the Clintons, and sometimes it's hard to separate one from the other. But
wow, that was pretty harsh, I thought. And even though I don't really disagree with some of what Rand Paul was saying there about Bill Clinton's behavior with Monica Lewinsky, but putting it on Hillary, that's just too much, I think. And you can also see Democratic Senator Dick Durbin pointing out the same thing in the segment that immediately followed that segment on Meet the Press, and I'll show you that clip here.
Campaign.
Listen, David, Hillary Clinton has established her own reputation, her own name, and her own basis for running for president should she choose to do it. And the issues that were raised by my colleague, Senator Paul, have been litigated in the public square for over a decade. For goodness sakes, let's judge Hillary Clinton based on her talents and her vision of America should she choose to run for president.
Hard to say.
Yeah, so I mean, that I think is also true, even though I don't totally disagree with what Senator Rand Paul said about Bill Clinton's behavior, what Senator Dick Durbin there said about Hillary Clinton not being responsible or shouldn't be judged on what Bill Clinton did with Monica Lewinsky. That is obviously true, I think, as well. But it sounds to me like the whole war on women, or I guess what Mike Huckabee was trying to say was a war for women. The Republicans are fighting a war for women. That was what he was trying to say when he got in trouble with that whole thing. I guess that issue hasn't gone away, and I want to show one more clip from Bill Maher on the whole war on women topic. He was talking about how Republicans claim to be the masculine party, and this is his new rule segment at the end, and he actually had a very long explication of how Democrats are really the more the tough people because they are for restraint and not for, bellicose war, warlike actions or whatever. But I don't know if you can watch the whole thing. I put links to the sources of all my clips down in the video description, but HBO doesn't make the whole thing available for free because it's pay TV. But anyway, I want to show this one thing about the fake Republican masculinity idea before I leave the whole war on women topic. From Bill Maher on last night, or on Friday night's HBO Real Time in this clip.
Because it's not really masculinity conservatives love anyway. It's bullying. Somehow we've gone from Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick, to Chris Christie's Speak Loudly and Be a Big Dick.
I just wanted to play that. I thought that was a good line from the Speak Softly and Carry a Big Stick of Republican Teddy Roosevelt. Anyway, I just thought I would cap off the war on women topic with that clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and I'm going to cover several different other topics that I mentioned, and one or two I don't think I did mention, but one I mentioned was NSA spying, and I want to follow up on several clips I showed on LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup last Sunday, where I showed Republican Representative Mike Rogers making this claim that Edward Snowden was a Russian spy or got help from the Russians, and I pointed out last Sunday that he didn't really give any evidence of that, but it seemed to be a coordinated effort where he said it, and then Senator Dianne Feinstein didn't refute it and said it was possible, and then there was Mike Morrell, who was on this Civil Liberties Review panel, and also a former deputy CIA director. He also said it. And anyway, I showed all those clips last Sunday, so I want to follow up with that. Here's Senator Dick Durbin getting asked about what Representative Mike Rogers said on Meet the Press last week. This week on Meet the Press by David Gregory in this clip.
On this program last week, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee suggested that he is a spy for the Russians. Is there any evidence to corroborate that, to validate making that kind of charge?
I haven't seen any.
You think there's an effort on the part of some lawmakers to try to smear him publicly?
Well, I can't say that because Mr. Rogers is the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and yet a person I have great respect for. I think he's professional, a former FBI agent. I take what he says very seriously. I've not seen any evidence to suggest what he said.
So I guess that's kind of the nice way to call Representative Mike Rogers a liar there, because, saying, how he's got all this integrity and is a former FBI agent. But on the topic of Mike Rogers being a former FBI agent, I want to show a clip from one of Edward Snowden's legal advisors responding to this charge. Her name's Jesselyn Radack. And listen, I'll show her response, and then you'll see at the end she mentions an important fact about the FBI. Over in this clip.
Program, as you know, last week, the head of the Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, suggested that he had help from the Russians, might even be a Russian spy. How does he respond to that? And does he think that's part of some effort to smear him?
It's obviously part of a smear effort. It shows to me that the government is getting really desperate. The evidence against NSA continues to mount, most recently with the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which echoed a federal judge and the White House's own internal recommendations that the surveillance program is illegal and ineffective. And so then this spy allegation resurrected itself again. And unfortunately, Dianne Feinstein and Mike Rogers had a platform to smear the whistleblower with baseless innuendo without a scintilla of evidence to back up their allegation. Moreover, Mr. Snowden publicly chatted with the U.S. this week to deny being a spy. But if people don't want to take my word for it or Mr. Snowden's word for it, you can ask the FBI, which decided and still believes that he acted alone.
All right.
So yeah, there, Jesselyn Radack is pointing out that the FBI is saying, at least publicly, that Edward Snowden acted alone, and Representative Mike Rogers is a former FBI agent. He has the best FBI contacts of anyone in Congress, so that means if the FBI is, what it's saying publicly is true, then Mike Rogers should know what he said last week about Edward Snowden being a Russian spy is basically bogus. And that's what I said last week. I still haven't seen any evidence. I suppose anything's possible, but I think it was like a big smear job, and I want to show that clip from Jesselyn Radack making that point better than I can make it, that it was a smear job. So on the NSA question, I have a couple more clips, or on the whole NSA spying issue, I have a couple more clips. One, I want to show Rand Paul discussed his lawsuit that he's filed this class action lawsuit against Verizon, saying that they shouldn't be able to give out any of our information, or I think, is it against Verizon or all the phone companies? I can't remember. But anyway, it's a class action lawsuit against the phone companies saying they can't give out information without a warrant based on reasonable or based on probable cause issued by a judge. And David Gregory asked him if this was like just his lawsuit or if he'd been joined by any Republicans or Democrats. And I thought his answer was, oh wait, sorry, I'm going to get to that clip in a minute, but first, since we were talking about Edward Snowden, I want to show this clip of even Rand Paul, who's doing these good things like this lawsuit I'll show in a minute. He still wouldn't say that Edward Snowden should get amnesty or that he was a pure whistleblower. He still seemed to think that there might be consequences or should be, criminal consequences to his actions. But then he also said something else kind of interesting, and I'm going to show you that clip first. From Rand Paul on Meet the Press in this clip.
I'm not sure what the answer is. I've been responding not so much in a legal fashion, but I'm responding to some, I think, overheated rhetoric by people saying, let's string him up, let's shoot him, he's a traitor, this and that. I don't assign bad motives to Snowden. I think his motives were good. I'm not sure he did the right thing or did it in the right way. But I also don't assign bad motives to James Clapper. But James Clapper did break the law, and he exposed himself to 5 years in prison for perjury. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, we're going to throw the book at Snowden and we're going to ignore perjury to Congress by James Clapper. I think they both, if you want to apply the law has to be applied equally.
So yeah, I thought that was interesting that Senator Rand Paul would go so far as to say that that James Clapper from the National Security Agency, I think, is he head of the National Security Agency or is he Director of National Intelligence? I think he might be Director of National Intelligence. I should have looked that up beforehand. Sorry, but I do have a clip to show you. I showed this several times a few months ago when this first came up. This is from last March. James Clapper answering a question from Oregon Senator Ron Wyden. This is before the Edward Snowden leaks, and this is what Senator Rand Paul was talking about in terms of James Clapper having lied to Congress. Here is the full clip of what James Clapper said in answer to a question from Oregon Senator Ron Wyden before anyone knew about all the Edward Snowden stuff here.
Last summer, the NSA director was at a conference, and he was asked a question about the NSA surveillance of Americans. He replied, and I quote here, "The story that we have millions or hundreds of millions of dossiers on people is completely false." The reason I'm asking the question is, having served on the committee now for a dozen years, I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
My favorite part of that clip is the way he's like rubbing his head like the worst poker player on the face of the earth. Like that's the worst tell ever. Or I don't know. Maybe he just had an itch, but that's my favorite part of that clip anyway. And I've showed it several times before, but I haven't showed it in a while. So that is James Clapper basically lying to Congress. Now, whether that's perjury, as a former criminal defense attorney, I know that just because you think you have someone saying something that's not true, there are all sorts of possible loopholes as to why that might not actually end up being a conviction. But I can't disagree with Rand Paul saying that it looks like a lie, and it looks like lying to Congress, at least on the face of it there. And so I want to show that clip. And I also was talking about how Rand Paul was answering a question about his lawsuit. I said I was going to play in a minute. Here's that clip. This is actually from CNN State of the Union. Candy Crowley asked him if any other Democratic or Republican senators had joined his lawsuit against the phone companies, which he then described, and I'll show you that clip here.
Have you gotten any Democrats or any Republicans, for that matter, to join you in that suit?
There are several Democrats who I talk with on a routine basis about trying to reform the NSA. I don't know if any of them are ready to be on the lawsuit yet, but on legislation, I am on legislation with Senator Wyden and Udall and Blumenthal to try to reform the FISA courts, to try to reform the NSA, to try to end some of this collection of records. But our court case will be historic because it'll be the first time that a class action suit, over 350,000 people are saying you can't have my phone records if the warrant doesn't have my name on it and it doesn't specify what you want them for and it doesn't accuse me of some kind of crime with probable cause. This is an incredibly important debate over the Fourth Amendment. And so I think our lawsuit will have great ramifications, and I think it'll make it to the Supreme Court.
Well, I mean, I agree that with Senator Rand Paul there that issue will make it to the Supreme Court sometime in the next couple of years. I mean, there are two different courts. There's a court from a district court from Washington, D.C. has found the NSA spying bulk phone record collection unconstitutional. I talked about that one week. And then another week I talked about this other district court that found it constitutional. So... And it's really kind of an open question in terms of what the Supreme Court has said. As I've discussed in the past, there's this Smith versus Maryland, or is it Maryland? Smith versus Maryland case from the late 70s that for one person said the government did not have to get a warrant to go to the phone company and put like what's called a pen register and listen in on this what's called metadata now, which is not the contents of the phone call, not wiretapping on what people are saying, but on the number called and the length of the call and the location of the two ends of the call. That's the metadata. And the Supreme Court has said that you don't need a warrant because you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy and information you've already given to this business, this third party, the phone company. But it's kind of an open question as to whether that Supreme Court case from the late 70s that applied to getting one record of one phone call or one person's phone calls would apply to getting everybody's phone calls. And that issue I do think will get to the Supreme Court. I don't know whether it will be through Senator Rand Paul's lawsuit or there's the D.C. Circuit one or the D.C. District Court was, I think, Larry Klayman and the Justice Watch, which is this like right-wing watchdog group. And then there's the ACLU lawsuit that got a bad ruling in the district court the following week. But anyway, that's all the clips I have on NSA spying. I have a few other topics. I want to talk a little bit about the Sochi Olympics that are coming up in the next couple weeks. And I've shown a couple clips. I think a couple weeks ago I showed clips about the possible terrorist threat to the Olympics. There have been some ongoing threats, because the Sochi is not that far from the Chechen area and the Caucasus and like the place where the Boston Marathon bombers came from. And there have been some recent bombings there and some recent threats. And one of the things that came up this last week was that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of the core Al-Qaeda, is called for global jihad on the Olympics. And then there's also been these reports of these Black Widow bombers, which is people whose husbands have been killed and who are now like suicide bombers. And I'll show you that last thing. I'm going to show you a little introductory clip where Jonathan Karl on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos wasn't there this week, he threw over to Martha Raddatz in the Mideast is what he said, and then she talked a little bit about what was going on in Sochi. And one of the weird things about this clip I thought was they never said where Martha Raddatz was. If you look really quickly, you'll see they flash up that she's in Baghdad, and I don't know if they didn't say it because there's some security reason they don't want people to know she's in Baghdad, or maybe just because it seems weird that she's reporting on Sochi from Baghdad, but they said Middle East. So anyway, I'll show you first. Here's that first Sochi clip from Jonathan Karl going to Martha Raddatz on This Week with George Stephanopoulos on ABC in this clip.
First Sunday show interview, but we begin with an Olympic alert. New warnings out this weekend about security in Sochi. Let's go straight to Martha Raddatz, who's reporting this morning from the Middle East. Martha.
Good morning, John. With opening ceremonies only 12 days away, Russia and indeed the world are on high alert. The U.S. State Department issued a new travel advisory Friday, noting the possible presence of so-called Black Widow suicide bombers in Sochi.
So yeah, you can see there that there is definitely a big possible threat on the Olympics. And I don't know if you noticed what I was talking about, how they like briefly flashed up that it was ABC News Baghdad Bureau or whatever that she was reporting from. But they never, and I watched the whole This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and they had Martha Raddatz on a couple times, and they never said where she actually was. That was the only clue she was in Baghdad, and I thought that was a little weird. But on the whole question of the threat to the Sochi Olympics, they talked about that on all the shows. I want to show also later from This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Jonathan Karl talked to Republican Representative Peter King from New York. He's, I think, chairman of Homeland Security Committee, and he is like a big proponent of making people fearful of terrorism, and he's talked about the hidden Muslims in the United States as a threat too. He held hearings on that a couple of years back, so I don't have a lot of respect for his views on the threats of terrorism. I think he hypes them, but he was over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and his message was pretty much, be afraid, be very afraid, I thought. Anyway, I'll show you that clip right here.
Can you reassure our athletes going to Sochi that they're going to be safe?
I cannot give them a 100% guarantee. The fact is that these are going to be very much threatened Olympics, probably more than any we've had in our past, more than Greece, certainly more than London and China. So no, it's, I mean, everything is being done by the United States, but the fact is this is a dangerous region in Russia, by the North Caucasus. There are active terrorist organizations there, and quite frankly, the Russians have not been cooperating with us or with other countries anywhere near the extent that, for instance, the Greeks or the Chinese or the Brits did.
Well, what about this suggestion?
So there you can see Representative Peter King telling us to be afraid of what's going to happen at the Olympics, and I mean, for all I know, there will be some problem at the Olympics. Although what the conventional wisdom I've heard repeated several times over the weeks is that there's really strong security right at Sochi. There's what it's called, like the Iron Ring or something like that, with like almost 100,000 Russian troops. So if there are going to be terrorist attacks, it might be like at the train station somewhere, not right in Sochi, or some like transportation nexus or other like high value target that isn't right in Sochi. That's what I've heard several people say, but I don't know if there'll be a terrorist attack or not. But another Republican Congressman, Mike McCaul, who I showed on last week's show, talking from Russia, just got back, and based on the background, I think this was from Face the Nation, but the background is like in Los Angeles, Griffith Observatory. I recognize I'm pretty sure that's Griffith Observatory behind him, and he said like the Sochi Olympics are the most threatened Olympics ever. So he was definitely part of the brigade spreading fear about Sochi this morning, I thought, and I'll show you that clip here.
We should not scare people from attending the Olympics. It's a time-honored tradition. If we do not support our team and show up, I think the terrorists are winning, and that's what they're trying to do here. Having said that, I would say that the security threat to the Olympics, this particular Olympics, are the greatest I think I've ever seen because of the proximity of the terrorist to the Olympic Village. And just recently, Bob, most significantly, now we have the leader of al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, now calling for a global jihad against these Olympics. As a Homeland Security Chairman, that is very disturbing to me in terms of the security at the Olympics.
Well, what? So yeah, he said, don't be afraid because then the terrorists will win, but he also sounded kind of like he was afraid. So I don't know what you want to make of that. But also I want to show a quick clip. Candy Crowley on CNN State of the Union, she actually had the Russian ambassador on, and let me see if I can get his name right. Sergey Kislyak, I think is his name. Sergey Kislyak is the Russian ambassador to the United States, and she actually asked him, well, I'll show you the question, but you'll see she kind of made a faux pas referring to part of Russia as a war zone and asked if it was a mistake to hold the Olympics in Sochi, and I'll show you that clip here.
That these Olympics are going to take place full speed ahead in Sochi, which essentially is right next door to a war zone. Was it a mistake to choose that spot?
It wasn't, for several reasons. One, Sochi is as safe as the rest of Russia. Secondly, Sochi is pretty unique a place in terms of its geographics, climate, and very uniqueness in Sochi being kind of resort area on a warm sea, and in 2 hours and a half you can do downhill skiing. So it's a wonderful place for Olympics first. Secondly, it's not close to a war zone. There is no war zone in Russia.
Well, it
Oh, sorry about that. That's going to be the next clip I show you in a minute. Yeah, so he said he seemed to take offense, and I didn't show the rest of the clip there, but Candy Crowley like almost apologized for calling it a war zone. She said technically it's not a war zone, but as to the question of whether it was a mistake to hold the Olympics in Sochi, they did a little satire of that on Saturday Night Live. This is Kate McKinnon played this oppressed Russian woman, a Russian peasant almost. I can't remember the name she gave her, and she answered the question as to whether it was a mistake to choose Sochi as the site of the Olympics in this quick Saturday Night Live clip.
Wow. I mean, how did the Olympics pick Russia? What was the other options? Haiti or middle of ocean?
Okay. Come on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think those were the two other places, Haiti or middle of the ocean, but there were some other good choices. I heard on a show earlier this week they were talking about whether maybe they shouldn't be awarding the Olympics to dictatorships anymore, but I don't know. It'd be a tough political decision, you know. I mean, if you're only going to award the Olympics to countries with total freedom, does that rule out the United States? I don't know. There are a lot of countries that are that oppress people in various different ways, and it would be difficult to figure out where to draw that line, I guess. I also want to show a couple quick clips on Obamacare. I guess this is more Obamacare, how it's going to play out politically in 2014 and 2016 maybe. First, there was some news. I think this is, if I hope I didn't get this clip wrong, but I think this is Bill Kristol, who is a pundit, you know, for a conservative, neoconservative editor of the Weekly Standard. Used to be a big Fox News guy, but now I see him on some other shows. I think this is a clip of Bill Kristol on Face the Nation breaking some news about what the Republicans are going to do about Obamacare, or their legislation that they're going to introduce this week over in this clip.
Obamacare. Yeah, I mean, Obamacare is, I think, really a disaster and not getting better. But the best talking point Democrats have had is, well, what would you do? Just go back to the status quo ante, which wasn't so great. People losing health insurance, at least allegedly, if they had pre-existing conditions, poor people having trouble getting health insurance. So I think I'm not supposed to be revealing this, but since you asked me, I guess I just have to say it. No, senior Republican senators tomorrow are going to lay out the outlines of legislation, which I think will become real legislation. There would be a conservative reform alternative to Obamacare. It would deal with the pre-existing condition problem. It would have tax credits for the poor. It would get rid of all the ridiculous bureaucracy, regulation, limitations of Obamacare. And I think this will be Senator Coburn of Oklahoma, who's retiring, very well respected. Senator Hatch, who is the ranking Republican on the Finance Committee, will become chairman of Senate Finance next year if Republicans win the Senate. And Senator Burr, who's senior on the Health Committee. So this is a serious piece of legislation. It could get, I think, pretty across-the-board support from Republican senators. There are some tweaks in it that there'll be debates among Republicans and conservatives about how generous to be with the subsidies and with the tax credits and so forth. But I think it really will make it harder for the president and for Democrats to say the Republicans have no alternative.
I love that part near the beginning. I should have mentioned where he said that before Obamacare, in the bad days before Obamacare, people allegedly lost their insurance. I don't know where that came from, but the news he's breaking there is actually important news, because I think it is true that one of the big weaknesses Republicans have in their attacks on Obamacare is they don't really have an alternative. But the thing is, I don't know exactly what the substance of this alternative is going to be, but sometimes it's not that much more of a strength to have an alternative if it's not a good alternative. And once you put a concrete alternative out there, then it's open to criticism. And the Republican ideas have never been very good on health care. In fact, Obamacare is one of those not so great Republican ideas that Obama adopted. You know, I mean, a lot of people know that story anyway, but it's certainly not, single payer or even public option. And as you get farther away from that, I think things get worse and worse. So I think it'll be nice to have a Republican plan to criticize, is the point I wanted to make on that. Now, speaking of criticizing healthcare plans, over on ABC, they seem pretty sure that Obamacare was going to be a big weight on Democrats in the upcoming elections. And I mean, that may be true. It depends a lot. There's been a lot of bad press for the rollout of the website, a lot of deserved bad press that I showed you several clips on over the, back in October and November, especially after the end of the government shutdown. It became, one of the big stories that the Obamacare website rollout wasn't going well. So there have been a lot of press about that. So Obamacare right now has really bad poll numbers. And you'll see when Jonathan Karl had an interview with White House Press Secretary Jay Carney, he tried to ask him, was Obamacare worth, if the Democrats lose the Senate in the 2014 elections, will Obamacare still have been worth it? And he cited those poll numbers. But I happen to think that there's a good chance Obamacare will be a lot more popular even by the 2014 elections, because a lot of the problems hopefully have peaked, or I don't know. Well, I'll talk about that more after I show you this clip of Jonathan Karl quizzing White House Press Secretary Jay Carney on the weight of Obamacare, or whether it's going to lose the Senate for Democrats here.
To be the biggest headache for Democrats in 2014. Our poll shows 59% disapprove of how Obamacare has been implemented. And conservative groups are blasting Democratic candidates over Obamacare.
Obamacare doesn't work.
Will it have been worth it if you lose the Senate? I mean, you already lost the House because of the health care law.
I'll tell you what.
Will it have been worth it politically?
Expanding access to quality and affordable health insurance to millions of Americans, reducing the growth in health care costs, which is happening.
Would it have been worth it if you lose the Senate? That's a simple...
This is not about politics. So the answer is, it is absolutely worth it, no matter what happens
even if
politically.
You lose the Senate.
Because and I tell you, and I just disagree that Republicans are going to have a winning issue on this if they decide to run on it, because they got to explain what repeal means.
Now you could see there Jay Carney pulling out the Republicans don't have an alternative if they repeal Obamacare argument, which is what Bill Kristol was talking about. Republicans are now going to try to counteract by introducing this legislation, but that could be a problem. But I also think that what Jay Carney said there could really be true, especially as more and more people get benefits and coverage from Obamacare, and the nasty rollout of the website for the first month becomes more of a distant memory. As long as enough people sign up and there aren't, all sorts of additional problems. And I mean, it's not the best system, but it is an improvement, and it does have a lot of ways that increase access to health insurance for a lot of people, and it does get rid of some of the worst abuses that insurance companies used to engage in. So, I mean, there are a lot of good things in Obamacare, even though it's not the best system. But I also want to show, that was Jonathan Karl basically assuming in his question to Jay Carney that it was going to be something that was negative, possibly lose the Democrats the Senate. And then later on ABC's This Week, they started one of their series of looking at important races. This is one of the Senate races that could decide who wins the Senate. This is Arkansas Senator Mark Pryor, and they also did an interview with his Republican opponent. But here's ABC reporter Jeff Zeleny asking Democratic Senator Mark Pryor basically the same question that Jonathan Karl asked Jay Carney, and I will show you that clip here.
So unpopular. How big of a political weight is this around your neck?
I think time will tell. I want the legislation to work. Here's the thing about my Republican colleagues in Washington. They do not want to see us fix this. They want it to fail.
Millions of dollars.
So yeah, there you can see that is basically the narrative coming from the reporters, not even just from Republicans, but from the ABC reporters. The narrative is that Obamacare is going to be a big weight for Democrats in the 2014 elections, possibly losing them the Senate. And while that might be true, I don't think it's certainly true that it should be the assumption and a question. But I don't know, it's not the worst journalistic lapse ever, especially since they're asking Democrats, so it's sort of a more adversarial question to ask Democrats. So I can at least give them credit for doing that. And speaking of getting a little adversarial, over on Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer had Senator Ted Cruz on and tried to ask him several times about the government shutdown that he helped engineer back in the beginning of October, and never even got Senator Ted Cruz to admit that he was in favor of a government shutdown. And I'm not going to show you all the back and forth on that, but I'll show you like the first part of that and how he segues over into an attack on Obamacare over in this clip.
Talk about. Let me ask you this. You became a celebrity when you led the drive to shut down the government over Obamacare, but afterward your fellow Republicans said you led them over a cliff. Can you conceive of any situation in which you would do that again, try to shut down the government in exchange or in demand for some action by the president?
Well, Bob, with all due respect, I don't agree with the premise of your question. Throughout the government shutdown, I opposed a government shutdown. I said we shouldn't shut the government down. I think it was a mistake that President Obama and the Democrats shut the government down this fall. The reason they did so is that President Obama dug in and said he wouldn't compromise, he wouldn't negotiate. In fact, I went to one of the most surreal meetings I've ever been at, where President Obama invited all the Senate Republicans to go up to the White House. He sat us in a room. This is in the middle of the shutdown, and he said, I invited you here to tell you I will not negotiate, I will not compromise on anything. That's why we had a shutdown. That was a mistake. But, you know, in terms of whether we should have stood and fought on Obamacare, I think the proof is in the pudding. Millions of people across the country have seen now why we were standing and fighting, because Obamacare is a disaster. And you know, for the State of the Union, one of the things President Obama really ought to do is look in the TV camera and say to the over 5 million Americans all across this country who've had their health insurance canceled because of Obamacare, to look in the camera and say, I'm sorry. I told you if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep it. I told you if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. And that wasn't true. I'm sorry. But then, Bob, here's the real kicker. If you're really sorry, you don't just say you're sorry, you actually do something to fix the problem. The pattern we've seen over and over again with this president is he says he's sorry, he expresses outrage, but then he doesn't fix the problem. He keeps doing it over and over again.
All right.
So it sounds like Senator Ted Cruz there has prepared his talking points for the Republican primaries as to why the government shutdown was not a failure. Of course, he wasn't in favor of a government shutdown. He said, like I said, if you go watch Face the Nation, you can see the whole thing at the link in the video description down there. You'll see that Bob Schieffer tried several times to get him to admit that he was partly responsible for the government shutdown because he made funding of Obamacare, or defunding of Obamacare, a prerequisite for funding the rest of the government. But anyway, I think it also shows that Senator Ted Cruz is depending on the failure of Obamacare in order to be his talking point to justify all the kind of crazy things that he's done. And I don't know if that's going to work, but it sounds like he's getting ready to run for president. Speaking of which, Senator Rand Paul was also asked about something Senator Ted Cruz said about him in this possible upcoming rivalry for the Republican nomination in 2016. It was actually Senator Ted Cruz had said that Rand Paul was too tied to Ron Paul's legacy, and I wanted to show that because, of course, for all my YouTube, longtime YouTube viewers or anyone who's spent any time on the internet over the years knows that Ron Paul is a much bigger online phenomenon than he is a phenomenon anywhere else. And so I wanted to show how this is, this is Rand Paul over on Meet the Press answering this question. You'll see David Gregory first read the Ted Cruz quote to him about his father and then his response here.
Fellow Republicans, and maybe he's one that will run against you for the Republican nomination. Ted Cruz has described your strident libertarianism of your father as an issue that will always be a shadow over anything you try to do.
You know, I think one of the things, and, you know, don't be trashing my dad too much. That's my dad, you know. But the thing is I would say that my dad was extraordinary in Washington, and then being genuine, being really liked by people on both sides, being close to people from the conservative wing of the party, but also very close to the Congressional Black Caucus as well. He went to Berkeley and had 7,000 kids on their feet. He went to Liberty University and had 7,000 people on their 7,000 conservative Christian kids on their feet. So that's a rare figure in politics, and I would say I'm proud of my dad. And what I would say I'm trying to do is to try to bring that message to an even bigger crowd.
But Senator,
So I guess that wasn't a bad response to someone attacking your dad, but I do think there is kind of a upcoming GOP fight between Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, especially because they're both going for the same voters, the Tea Party voters, and then someone's going to end up being the Tea Party candidate, and then someone will be the establishment candidate. That was possibly going to be New Jersey Governor Chris Christie if he can get past all of his scandals. And speaking of scandals, excuse me for I've been a little bit sick, but trying to finish the show here. And speaking of Republican scandals, one of the big scandals that came out this last week was from another Republican governor, outgoing governor of Virginia, McConnell, got Bob McDonald. Bob McDonald got in a bunch of trouble for accepting all these gifts, and his use of a Ferrari and all these kind of ritzy, and help with his daughter's wedding. And I'm not going to show any clips on this except, and I don't normally show commentary from pundits because I don't like to comment on the commentators, but this is Greta Van Susteren, who is a lawyer, making a legal judgment about the case that I think since I am also a former criminal defense attorney, I just had to show a big flaw in what Greta Van Susteren said. And she's a Fox News person, but she was over on ABC's This Week on their panel talking about the Bob McDonald indictment over in this clip.
Okay, you read that and you think that he's toast. It is a horrible indictment. One side it has got Ferrari, Rolex, everything about you just hate the first family, former first family of Virginia. But here's the tip. We read in the Washington Post that they were offered one felony to get rid of, the 28 counts indictment. And if he accepted one felony, 14 counts of hers would go away. She'd walk away from it, and 13 of his. That's the most fantastic plea offer ever.
And he turned it down.
Yes, but here's the trick. The only reason that a prosecutor gives you that kind of fantastic deal, especially in Virginia, is because they have a weak case. The quid pro quo is weak. Otherwise, they'd never give you a deal like that.
Well, I mean, that could be one reason they would give you a deal like that, but another reason might be that you were governor of the state, then a pretty powerful person and likely to have quite a defense team. And I mean, there is some difficulty in making the political quid pro quo argument, but I think that there might be some other possible reason, and maybe even some influence from the people, his current defense. I mean, maybe as governor of the state, he had some influence that got him a good deal. That is at least one other possibility other than the one that Greta Van Susteren gave there. So I wanted to show that clip. I have a couple other quick issues. I have a couple clips on before I check in the comment section and see if I can dig out a couple on-topic comments about the clips to respond to and maybe get a little live discussion going. First, I want to show a couple clips on immigration. You know, for several weeks it was the big issue, comprehensive immigration reform, and it passed the Senate, and now with I think what was it, almost 70 votes, a lot of Republicans adding to all the Democrats, and they added in all this, I think one person said everything but a moat in terms of border security. They put in all this money, way too much money on border security, ridiculous amounts of money to balance out the fact that they gave this path to citizenship that takes like a dozen years and requires paying all these fines. And anyway, that was the compromise that came out of the Senate, and it looks like it's not really going to happen in the House, but at least I've heard that there may be some movement this year, especially once they get past the primary season, so that the Congress people who vote on it don't have to worry about, the Republican Congress people don't have to worry about a challenge in the primary on their right. They don't even have to wait for the primary election. They just have to wait till after the filing deadline, and then they have more room to vote for this kind of thing. And it looks like there may be this compromise coming up. And I'll show you first. Here's Chuck Schumer, and I showed several clips of Senator Chuck Schumer from New York saying why he thought there was this perfect storm of Republican interest to get a deal, and he kind of repeats that over on Face the Nation. I want to show you that clip here.
Think there's any chance of getting anything done on immigration reform this year?
I do, Bob, and let me tell you why. There's a lot of Republicans who feel that they should do something. This is not a monolith, even among the hard right. Economic conservatives like immigration reform, and in fact, many of them supported the bill that John McCain and I put together in the Senate. You have major Republican groups, evangelical Christians, the business community, the high-tech community lobbying for this. Speaker Boehner is now entertaining it. Obviously, he's not going to do it exactly the way we do it, but I would predict that we will get immigration reform done this year. It'll be another example of the mainstream Republicans not just listening to the Tea Party, but doing what's right for their country and for their party.
All right.
So yes, Senator Chuck Schumer still has hope that some kind of immigration reform will get done, and it looks like the deal that is going to come out of the House is that they're going to give not a pathway to citizenship, but just a pathway to legal status for most of the like 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, and then they'll give a pathway to citizenship to what they call the Dreamers, the people who the DREAM Act would have applied to if it had ever passed, which is people who were brought as children to the United States illegally, but through no fault of their own. So they'll get a pathway to citizenship, and I don't know if that's going to be enough. If the Republicans in the House come up with that compromise, I don't know if they'll be able to get enough Democrats in the Senate to go along with it. And senior advisor to the president, Dan Pfeiffer, was on a couple shows this morning, one of which was Fox News Sunday, and Chris Wallace asked him if the White House would accept this compromise, and he said they were willing to. He didn't rule it out, but he didn't rule it in, I guess is the way to put it. I'll show you that clip here.
And House Republican leaders, and there was a big kind of leak about it this weekend, are apparently working on a plan in which they might offer legal status to the 11 million residents, undocumented workers who were here illegally, not a path to citizenship, except perhaps for young kids, the so-called dreamers, the ones who are brought here as children, but a legal status. Is that a compromise the president would be willing to accept?
I think what we should do here is let the Republicans put forward their plan. The president's been very clear about what he wants. He's talked about it for years. He campaigned on it in 2012. He supported the Senate bill that included a path to citizenship. We think it's progress that the Republicans are going to put something forward. We know this is not easy for them, that there's some divisions in their party over it. Let's see what they put forward, and then hopefully we can come together and make some progress.
So you're going to give them some space to work on this. This is not something, for instance, in the State of the Union, you're going to beat them up about.
No, the president's been very consistent that he wants to see what they put forward and try to get something. He doesn't want an issue, he wants a solution, and that's what you're hearing in the State of the Union.
And I actually cut the clip there before Chris Wallace asked him again, does that mean you'll accept it? And he basically said that they'll listen, they haven't decided. And so I don't know if that's where it's going to break down or that's where it's going to come together. I think legal status is almost a second-class citizenship status where, you have the right to be here, but you're deportable for all sorts of stuff, and especially if it's some sort of like work visa that is tied to a single employer, that would be the worst outcome, because then your boss has all this power over you, kind of like the power Bill Clinton had over Monica Lewinsky. But I don't know, that's kind of like a weird connection between topics. And anyway, I have two more clips I want to show you on one final topic. I showed some stuff about the war on poverty and rising inequality in some of the last couple shows, and I think that's going to be a big topic in the President's State of the Union address. That's the big upcoming news event, or one of the upcoming news events this week. On Tuesday, the President is going to give his State of the Union to Congress, and that's a big speech that is going to have a lot of different, it's usually like a laundry list setting the agenda for, and then there was actually a lot of talk about that in clips I didn't show, but one thing I wanted to show was Candy Crowley kind of called Dan Pfeiffer, senior advisor to President Obama, on this whole income inequality topic, and how can President Obama claim to be a champion of stopping income inequality when there's been a lot of rise in income inequality during his term, especially because the way the economy has been growing is mostly through stimulus by the Federal Reserve, which increases the stock market, and that mainly benefits the rich, and it leads to this really nasty statistic that Candy Crowley used to question Dan Pfeiffer with, and I'll show you that clip here.
In the years between 2009 and 2012, those beginning recovery years in the Obama administration, the top 1% of wage earners in the U.S. captured 95% of the income gains in those 3 years, and that, again, during the recovery. So 95% of the top 1%. So that's increasing so far, it would seem to me that policies of the Obama administration have increased that gap.
No, this has been a trajectory that the country's been on for a very long time. And this president has taken several key steps to try to slow that trend and reverse it. Passing the Affordable Care Act, which will do as much to deal with inequality in this country, so millions of Americans aren't one illness away from bankruptcy. The big fight we had over the fiscal cliff a couple of years ago, where for the first time in a very long time, the president was able to get Republicans to raise taxes on the wealthy and protect tax cuts for the middle class to make our tax system more progressive, more fair, so they did more to reward work as opposed to wealth.
It's kind of hard to argue about, okay, we've really got to do something when the first 3 years of the Obama administration actually increased that gap. That's sort of my point.
No, I think the president will lay out several steps on how we can deal with restoring opportunity for all Americans. The minimum wage, something he talked about last year, would do more to lift millions of Americans out of poverty. More good jobs, more skills for workers. There's a lot we can do, and these things have had bipartisan support in the past.
Now, I don't know if the White House is going to get the bipartisan support on those issues, even if it's had bipartisan support in the past. And on that issue, I want to show you one more clip. This is from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's up for re-election and wants to be Majority Leader if the Republicans take over the Senate in 2014. And he was asked about minimum wage, which is one of the issues Dan Pfeiffer was talking about there. And I'll show you his answer did not seem very much like there was going to be Republican bipartisan support for a rise in the minimum wage, but at least maybe because he's still in a fight with a Tea Party opponent in a primary, that's why he has to say that there won't be, or maybe after his primary he'll still believe the same thing. I don't know, but anyway, here's what he said over on Fox News Sunday in this clip.
The president also wants, and I'm sure he'll call for it on Tuesday, to raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour over 3 years. Yeah. Doesn't it make sense? Isn't it reasonable that somebody who's working full-time, 40 hours a week, should be able to live above the poverty line?
Yeah, but of course the minimum wage is mostly an entry-level wage for young people. We have a crisis in employment among young people right now. The generation 18 to 30, the people that got out of college, are finding there are no jobs for them. The last thing we want to do is have even fewer jobs for younger people. There's no question that the minimum wage increase, if not done in conjunction with some kind of incentives for the businesses not to lay off employees, are going to dramatically increase unemployment. I don't think in this jobless recovery we ought to be doing things that create fewer jobs. We ought to be doing things that create more jobs.
So, yeah, that didn't sound like Mitch McConnell was going to support a rise in the minimum wage, at least not while he's still in a primary, and maybe not ever. Although, I think somewhere in that answer, did he say that it's too bad that people getting out of college can't find minimum wage jobs? Because I don't think people out of college are hoping for minimum wage jobs, but I don't know, maybe that's the Republican hope for college graduates, or maybe, I don't know, you have to go back and watch the clip again, but I think he did say that, because I watched the clip a couple times in the process of watching the shows and capturing the, choosing and capturing the clips. I hope you enjoyed all the clips I chose for you. I'm actually, like I said, I've been a little bit sick this weekend, so I don't know if I'm going to make it much longer, but I was taking kind of a peek at the live comments along the way, and I did see some that were kind of funny and on topic, and let me see if I can go back and retrieve them now that, let's see, there seems to be a bunch of people arguing with each other. Let me see. Hans Blitz says, Carney shaved. Yeah, he had a beard for a while. I think they were kind of making fun of him on Fox News for that one day I saw. Oh, Jam Spader also says, R.I.P. Carney's beard, we will never forget you. Okay, I don't know why Carney's beard would get all this attention, but I guess they say that appearance is about 80% of what people look at when you give some sort of press. That's what my press training did say something about that, so I shouldn't be wearing a t-shirt, and at least I shaved, so. Let's see, NO8549 says, tired of looking at Ted Cruz's mug. Well, sorry, from the clip I showed today and from several previous clips, I think that he's going to be running for president. I don't know even if he expects to win, but I think he's got a big fundraising machine all set up, and the chance of him not running for president in 2016 is pretty low. Not that I think he's going to win, but I mean, stranger things have happened, but I think you are going to be seeing Ted Cruz's mug for quite a while. Oh, and Mr. X00666 seems to kind of agree, saying, shut up, Cruz, just shut up. So, let me see here. Well, I see, there were a whole bunch of good comments here that were amusing me as the clips were playing, but like I said, I'm kind of about to lose my voice here, and I've been a little ill, so and I think yes, I'm over an hour already, so I hope you enjoyed the couple dozen clips I showed you. The last couple weeks I've also gotten out an edited produced video every week. If you are a fan of the shorter edited produced videos, well, you probably wouldn't have made it this far into this video, but look for those. I made a kind of fun MSNBC criticism video this last week called Justin Bieber beats NSA spying on MSNBC, about the way they cut to Justin Bieber during a discussion of NSA spying. And so check that out, and thank you all for joining me. This is my weekly show. I do 6:30 p.m. Pacific every Sunday, and I will be doing for every Sunday for the foreseeable future. I especially enjoyed having over 100 people in the live comment section. I wish I could have spent a little more time on that, but hopefully next week I'll get more to that. And like I said, hopefully I'll be starting a new feature where you'll actually be voting for a clip of the week pretty soon. So look for that. For my U.S. viewers, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, the Grammys, whatever it is that you're watching. And I'll be back on Super Bowl Sunday next week. And for my viewers around the world, enjoy the beginning of your Monday, or don't enjoy it so much. But I hope I made it a little more informative start to your week. So thank you.